Okay, so hello, and thanks for dealing. Okay, my thing's running out. That's fine, we don't need that. Sorry about the technical difficulties. My name's Simon Wiley. Hello. And yeah, we're going to have a look at this new thing called Azure Purview, and it's new and it's different, and it's kind of an interesting switch as to how things have worked previously. So again, I'm a Microsoft MVP. I do lots of things with Spark and Databricks and data lakes and distributed systems and Cosmos DB and databases. And as you can imagine, it gets kind of difficult. There's lots of different things going on. And so data governance is a massive topic. So that's what we want to talk about today. Purview is a governance tool. So we are here to talk about what that is, how it works, and how it all fits together. So let me just switch on. So data governance. You know, it's one of those terms where you can throw it out and people give you different answers. You'll have the information security guy who'll be like, well, you know, that's all about PII and stopping people accessing data when they shouldn't be able to, and removing people's access to data when they leave, making sure that if someone gives a, GDPR, a right to be forgotten, they say, get rid of my data. You know where that data is and you can get rid of it. And that's traditional data governance. People go, stopping people from accessing things, that's governance. But then you speak to like the people in the business who own the data, they're producing data, and they still talk about data governance, but they talk about, well, I don't want to have two data sets that are saying the same thing but conflicting. They want to make sure when data is developed, the naming standards are right. People call the same thing the same thing. They want to make sure that people have data dictionaries, business glossaries, all that kind of, the usability of data is a really important thing. And that seems very different to the governance side, like, it's all governance, that's the key. Data stewards, the people on the ground actually looking after the data, they want to know how clean's the data. How do we measure the quality of that bit of data versus that bit of data? What percentage of records going in there actually are valid and clean and have to be kicked out? How much work to maintain that data? And data engineering, my people, what are the rules? What's the metadata? How do I take that piece of raw data and turn it into the curated piece of business insight that people are asking for? What's the dependency chain of when that's finished, that has to kick on that, and that actually has lineage with that. The whole interrelatedness of data is a part of governance, and it's something that's intrinsically consumed by engineers. And a lot of the time it's owned by engineers, but it's still part of that whole data pipeline. And then finally, those people at the end, the people who actually are in the business and consume the data and use the data, are vitally, they need information. They need to know, how do I find the right data? How do I connect to it? They need to know, I want to understand profit. Where do I go to understand profit? And they need answers, need guidance. Otherwise, they'll invent their own. They'll build a little silo. They'll go into a whole mess of its own thing. And that's really hard. Those conflicting different ideas of what data governance actually is a whole tricky thing. So when you say, I'm going to make a new data governance tool, and then everyone goes, cool, I understand exactly what that is. But then in their minds, they're thinking entirely separate things. It's tricky. Okay, so, and that little thing sneaking down the bottom, a lot of people then sneak master data management into that. That's out of scope for what we're talking about. So if you're one of the people where you hear data governance and you go, oh yeah, master data management, is it really? It's a vitally important thing. It's baked into that whole ecosystem of things that we care about, but it's not in the scope of the kind of governance tools that we're talking about. So the kind of questions that you get, all relating to those same concerns. Who's asked my data? What would be impact if I changed this? So impact analysis is huge. Oh, the vendor's just going to change the naming on their table. Is that going to infect is that going to stop all of your reports working? And knowing, well, actually, those 5 reports are impacted. That one doesn't use anything. And then the report that the other side of the business use is actually going to be impacted. Good governance will give you the ability to do that. Not many people have that ability to see the interconnectedness of all of their data. How do they calculate this? What's the calculation behind profit? How do we stop people using different definitions? All of these are the vitally, these are what the actual business drivers for doing good governance is. Okay. So switching on, in the before times, back in the day before last November, there was this thing. So there was a tool in Azure called Azure Data Catalogue, and it's much maligned. Essentially, Microsoft came out with this tool that said, here is the answer to data cataloging in Azure, and everyone had all of those different expectations about what this tool would do. And so people actually commonly complain about it and go, it's not good enough, it's a failed project, it isn't really kind of fit for purpose. It's had a lot of stick. And that's not because it's not a good tool, it's because people had different expectations of the kind of problems that this tool would be actually trying to solve. It was very good for data discovery. It was a great place to just go, here's my master list of all the different data sources I have, and tagging documentation onto it, and tagging glossary elements onto it. So someone could come along and say, where do I talk about customers? And get a big list of a load of different places to talk about customers. No good at doing the automated discovery of data. No good at doing the locking down and the securing of data. No good at a lot of those other asks. But then it wasn't really meant to be. Or if it was, then they absolutely failed. But as far as I know, it wasn't meant to be tackling those problems. That's just the kind of assumption people have when you say data governance, which is tricky. So data catalog has been around. It's not heavily used. So as I said, it was good at documentation. Building a data dictionary and saying, inside this database, here are my fields and their structure. Wasn't very good at doing non-related structures. Business glossary, discovery, all that kind of stuff. Mainly built on the assumption people want to know this about their SQL servers. And actually, when you talk to a business, when you realize where the majority of data lies in a business, it's not often that like 90% of the data is in relational databases. Actually, it's in flat files, it's in bits of the Power Platform, it's in bits of Power BI, it's in a massive data lake. So all of these other bits of sources weren't really covered very well by data catalog. And if you don't see all of your data estate in your data governance tool, it's not a very good data governance tool. So wasn't very good at managing access and managing saying these people are allowed to see this data. And yeah, elaborate data concepts, that's just like full nested JSON and having interesting new data sets, having images, visual, audio, having basically what people are doing in a modern data estate. It couldn't really understand. It liked a database with tables and columns and all that stuff. And it didn't really have this lineage. It didn't have the idea of this data set came from that, through that processing, which came from that, and you can't really follow that through. And that is, again, something that's now vital in terms of what people look for. So data catalog, I think, gets a really raw deal, gets a very, very bad stick, but it's not fit for purpose for what we need to do these days. So if we're talking about a data estate, we're talking about the kind of thing people do, this is like super common architecture for the kind of things that I build. So we've got some data coming from something like a SQL managed instance or an on-prem system, some kind of operational SQL server. We're using data factories, spitting some data out and landing it in maybe blob storage, an intermediary store of some kind, and then pulling that into a lake in a fairly semi-unstructured kind of format, and then using Databricks, using Spark, using modern tool sets to then massage that data, to do data quality validation, to actually apply some kind of transformations to it, to apply business logic, maybe put it in something like dedicated SQL pools in Synapse, and then put it in some Power BI. You know, there's like this nice little lineage. So it was saying that a data quality tool needs to be able to look at that. That's kind of like an okay first stab. I'd quite like it, you know, if it can handle that, cool, that's better than the things that we've had before. What we're actually talking about is saying I need to handle that, plus a plethora of other homegrown self-service data sets and data flows and various other things cropping up in the Power BI workspace. Plus, you know, a range of other SQL DBs and point solutions, and maybe a bit of Cosmos DB behind a web application. And then obviously the on-prem servers, which have still got a load of legacy data because we've not migrated them yet. And obviously there's a little bit of Power Platform used to do some kind of bring some stuff from SharePoint, massage it, land it in a SQL DB, and there's probably a few of those. And of course, there's probably an access database somewhere in the organization, because there always is somehow. And that's more the kind of problem that we're talking about. In fact, that times 10, 20, 30. And saying in a data catalog, in order to be a good data governance solution, has to be able to understand these concepts, this mass sprawling nebula of data, and say, this is my data estate. And that's a challenging problem. That's kind of why it's taken a long time before we've had finally the answer. And it has been a long time. People have been saying, what is the data quality solution inside Azure for years? It's been a while. So that is what Azure Purview is. So if you hadn't garnered by now, the reason I'm banging on about all of this kind of stuff, Azure Purview is the new tool to try and tackle the question of governance. Now, they've deliberately not called it the Azure Data Catalog. They've not called it Azure Purview, the catalog in Azure, or anything like that. It is a separate system to try and say it's more than just a list of your data sets. It is a governance tool to try and tackle some of those other use cases that we had coming from those personas. So Azure Purview is for mapping, controlling, managing, and securing your data estate in and outside of Azure. And that is a big, grand use case statement, right? There's a lot of stuff in there. So, digging in, it was known for a long while as Azure Data Catalog Gen 2, and they've decided to move away from that. Various other projects going on, so it's a merge of a few different things going. And it looks like that, it is the new style of things, so very much like Synapse and like a Data Factory and Databricks. It's a separate portal. It is a browser-based solution inside Azure, and you can do a lot of stuff inside it. So you can go and register assets, you can go and browse your available category, you can go and bring new sources in, you can run automated scans to go and discover what's going on inside your data estate. So you have this like one-stop shop. They kind of come in, kind of Google-style search bar going, what do you want to understand? I want to understand customers. Here's a list of every kind of data entity, data asset that you have that pertains to a customer. And it's that kind of thing. And it's kind of built for a few different types of people. So it's built to have, your end user coming in and going, where do I mention customer? And getting a big list of here's everywhere that mentioned it. But also your information stewards going, where people use classified data. And also your engineers going, how do I understand that? Where did that data come from? And they're trying to bake all of these use cases in, which is why I set up with that list of people. Okay, so there's a few concepts. There's a few bits of terminology that's good to kind of try and get mapped in your brain before we dig into exactly what it looks like. So firstly, imagine this. We've got two clear different solutions that we've got in Azure. We've got Division 1 has got a managed instance, it's got a Cosmos DB, it's got SQL DB. There's kind of a resource group with a few things. Maybe we organize it like that. Division 2, a couple of SQL databases and a bit of Synapse. Now, the way that we map these things, each one of those different databases, each different essentially collection of data is a data source. And then we can collect data sources together into these things called collections. So collections, Division 1, Division 2, you can say, well, actually, I want to group these sources together and then these sources together. And then we have individual sources. So that's your starting point, right? You open up the blank sheet of Azure Purview and you go, I want to create a new collection and then register a load of sources. And they might be blob stores, might be Power BI, might be a data lake, might be whatever it is. And you register all your sources and you group them into these collections. Now you might just have one giant collection, which is the entirety of your data estate. You might be able to talk about it in different solutions, different ownerships. Maybe you're working for a big enterprise and you have different stewards in charge of these different business areas. So whatever way you want to cut up your data in terms of each individual's purview, then you can actually do that slicing of data to actually mix it up. Okay, then inside a source, we have a collection of assets. Now that is discovered once we've registered a source inside a collection, we can set up something called a scan. And that goes off, basically runs a load of metadata queries. So the type of source you choose is important because that changes how it actually runs those scraping queries to say what's inside that SQL DB. What tables and views do I have? What objects live inside that blob storage? What's inside my Cosmos DB? What are my different collections? What are my different document stores? So essentially you pick a source, you pick a scan, you tell that scan how often to run. Maybe you just do one scan to just initialize it. Maybe it scans every day, every week. That'll run a whole load of different detection things and a load of rules. Pull out this list of assets. Then inside each asset, we'll get a load of info, like some descriptions. We'll have a load of classifications. We'll have some properties. What kind of table, any indexing, what size, how many columns, what are the columns, what are the classifications of each of those columns. Just a ton of info gets scraped and then stored in the catalog. So the scans are building out this data dictionary, this physical specification of all those different assets that live inside of the source that you've registered. So get used to seeing assets, and assets can be a whole different range of objects. It's actually used for lots of different things. So an asset, as we go, if we're digging into something like a SQL DB, I've got a server and a database and a schema and a table, and then columns in that table, and they're all assets. They're just assets of a different type in a hierarchy. So when you're running your scan, it's building out this related chain, this hierarchy of assets that go together to describe the data set you're working with. So yeah, there's some awkwardness in terms of terminology. And actually, when you first start using this, it's like, wow, they've built it in a fairly complicated way for something that is kind of a business-facing tool. If you're thinking of this as a business user comes in and just goes, where do I find customers? And just gets a nice thing going, you want to go to the customer data set in Power BI. There's a lot more to it than that, because they'll come up with 200 different things, all that pertain to customer. And there's some reasons behind that, which we'll go into. Because it is based on this thing. So as part of the building of Azure Purview, they took one of the most common, one of the most adopted open source data catalogs, which is a thing called Apache Atlas. Now, this is used heavily all over the place in industry. It's actually a quite well-regarded data cataloging tool. So Purview is essentially Apache Atlas with then a load of additional metadata scrapers and a load of like essentially all the rules for doing classifications that you have in Security Center, in your Azure DB Trusted Advisor stuff that are baked into Synapse, where you go into those things and it goes, hey, I think this is PII data, I think this is sensitive, I think this is sensitive. They've taken all those collections of rules for analyzing data sets and doing data classification, and they've baked it into this new tool on top of Atlas. So it's kind of creating all of the Atlas structures. Hence, they didn't really have a lot of choice in terms of how assets are structured and that hierarchy and the naming conventions for how it plugs stuff together, because that's very much built to be Apache Atlas standard. Now, the good thing on all that side is that it bakes in the API. So whereas one of the big failings of Azure Data Catalog is that it was so good at doing the things it did well, and you couldn't really, it wasn't very nice to augment it. Calling the API to create a load of assets and plug it in to your automation, it was a little flaky. And so the fact that this is Apache Atlas standard API, it is the bog standard open source API that Apache Atlas runs on, and therefore there's a ton of community libraries and extensions of things that already exist. So data engineer, if I'm doing what I'm doing and I finish a process and I want that to go and update and augment that metadata and add extra stuff into the end of that process, I can call a bunch of existing APIs. So I can call it from Spark, I can call it from Azure Functions, I can call it from anywhere that can write a programming language. I can call that API and have it hooked in. And that ability to have it integrated as part of my process is vital for so many things. So forgive some of the object structures being a little bit overcomplicated. It feels a little bit over-engineered when you first open it, because it allows you to actually engineer it, which is a fantastic feature for me. Okay, so we'll take a quick look at how you actually get started. There is one word of warning. I think I've had this from everyone who's tried to get started so far. If you're working in an Azure subscription, that subscription needs to have certain resource providers enabled. So when you go in there and you go, I want to create an Azure Purview, you might just get this weird error. And if you get an error when you try and first create an Azure Purview subscription, it's probably because on your subscription, you need to enable those resource providers. There's a Purview one, you need to have Event Hub and storage all enabled on your subscription, and then you can go. Just beware, you might hit a button and get a weird error if you haven't done that. Next, we need to tell it how to connect. So we'll have a look at that. So Purview needs credentials. So if I'm setting up this data governance thing that's going to go and regularly scrape metadata from a SQL database and from a lake and from all these different places, it needs to know how to connect. And so we need to set up credentials and say, well, when you're connecting to that, this is the credential to use. And as it says, it can be username and password, it can be a service principal, it can be a SQL login, it can be a blob account. And the thing that I absolutely adore is that they all have to be key vault backed. There is no ability to add a credential that is not key vault backed. Again, key vault is the place where you store your credentials if you're being good about security in Azure. So the fact that this says, no, you can't just hard code your credentials, you have to use key vault. I mean, it kind of makes sense for a security purview governance system to actually make sure you do security properly. So it all makes sense to me. Right. Let's have a bit of a look at that. So I'm going to guess the button. There we go. Okay, all good. Okay, so I've set up a catalog in advance. So if you're going in here and you're setting it up, you can just do the normal create a resource, and I'm going to do a purview. I'll come up with Azure Purview, and then you can go and create it from there. Now, it's when you're in here and you're doing this create, give it a unique name, hit go. That's when you'll get an error if you haven't set up those resource providers. So if I just quickly show you where that is, if I'm on subscriptions, if I grab the name of my subscription, down this list, I do have resource providers down there. So that's the thing that you need. So go on resource providers, make sure you've got those three: Purview, Event Hub, and storage, and then we can make sure that that works. So if I say Purview, I can see Microsoft Purview is registered, and that means I can do it. So make sure you've got those ticked, and then you can go ahead and create one. Now, again, I already have one. I don't want to have multiple different Purview accounts, so I'm going to stick with my one Purview. Now, you do need to be, again, you need to have fairly elevated privileges when you're first working with Purview, because it is an admin. It's going up, trawling a lot of stuff around your particular system. So when you first create it, I think you first need AD, admin when you're creating it. There's some funny business around that. But you can, once you're created, add users and say, you're allowed to see certain things. You can see data sources, but you can't see the assets. And there's some fine-grained security once you're inside it. But for now, I'm just going to open up my studio, and then we can see what goes on inside. So, again, checking out my access and saying, what can I do? And I get this nice landing page, my kind of search catalog, what's going on inside it. I want to see customers. It's going to go off and search my list of what other assets I've registered. So this is kind of like the first base thing of coming in and saying what's going on inside there. There's a few bits that we've got on the side. So we've got registering sources. So that map of what are the different containers of data I've got somewhere in my entire system. I can go and manage that. And that's that same place I've got these idea of collections. So I've got this idea of, I've got my Synapse collection, which got a few things registered. I've got my test collection, which got a few things registered. So I can say I want to do a new one, give it a name. What's this going to be? This could be, I'm going to call it pass, just to be naughty. I'm going to create there. And then I can go and add things into there. So I can give it childs, I can give it a new register. So I can say inside my pass one, I want to register Synapse Analytics, a database, Power BI, and I can go and hook up the kind of things I want to go and add sources to. In this case, I'm just going to let's just pick a quick SQL database, fairly standard one. So ask me what I want to connect it to. So I'm going to call it my, or let's see which one I'm going to do first. Let's go into that one. I'm going to pass it into there. It should be fun. Okay, so I'm going to register that. And that goes off, and that's registered the database. So just hooked up, connect to this thing. This is where you get the data from. This is how you go and connect. And again, I could have given it a better name. Let's just, I can't change the name once I've added it. Great. And then you've got this thing, this scan button. And that's what it's saying. So it understands what's inside that database. I need to tell it how often to go and connect to it. So which database to connect to, which credential to use to go and connect to it. So I could have saved some SQL ones in advance. I might have my Purview managed identity in there. And then I can set up what the actual scan should be. And I've not actually set up this database, so I have to use an existing one. Yeah, fine. So I take one that I know works. Go in here, pick my database name, which is just going to be my VentureWorks one. Okay, then it's done a quick preliminary scan. It said, right, this is what's in there already. Which of these do you want to do a scan on? So we could say, well, actually, it's only certain parts of it. I want you to scan everything. You can set up how what part of it you want to be scanned, but then you can choose the scan that it should do. So by default, there's this kind of existing full scan, and that has a load of rules in there. So what are you looking for? Are you looking for Australia's driving licenses? Are you looking for identity card numbers? All these different rules that it's going to run. And actually, the more of those things you've got selected, the longer the scan takes. So in this case, I'm just saying, well, just take my default one. You can define your own. So I could say, well, actually, I don't need to check all those different things. I want a really slim number of rules to make it run faster. So you can define the type of scans that happen, and you can kind of augment and curate the type of rules that actually go in there. And we'll come on to some of those bits a little later. But once you run that scan, I just grab an existing scan, actually. Go past there. Go past there. That's fine. You can do that. Do that. And then we get to choose how often do you want it to run? I want it to run every week, every day, and that's kind of the granularity. This is all based on the assumption that it's scanning on, maximum daily, maximum, well, actually kind of maximum weekly on this one. And it's not a, I want to look every time someone does anything, I want to scan it. It's a go through, collect it, just weekly update all my stuff. Things aren't going to change that much. And I kind of take a little bit of umbrage with how rarely some of these scans runs. But we can do it once and just say, go and get all my data, bring it in, and then I'm going to browse it. So if we go up to the top, I've got this browse assets button, and I can then go, of all the things that I have scanned, what's in there? So I can see the different things I've got. I've got a couple of databases, a few legs, I've got a data factory, I've got a few different bits and pieces. Dig into a database, go and explore what's in AdventureWorks, dig down to my sales LT, get an idea what's in there, and then I've got a load of assets. So once you get down to a certain point, you've got the kind of just, I'm digging down my hierarchy, and then you get to an actual asset. An asset has all these properties, when it was modified, when it was registered, what its full name is in terms of the actual URL. If it is a data asset, I've got a schema. So if I'm looking at some things like a folder or like a database schema or a database container, that doesn't have a schema associated. When it gets to a certain point, it knows that that is a container of actual data. So if it finds like a CSV, it'll have a schema. If it finds a folder, it won't have a schema. So it depends on the type of thing that you get to. And we'll come on to some of those other bits like lineage and what the classifications and things mean in a little bit. But essentially, that's kind of like the first step, right? So you go here, you build your connections, you register some sources using your credentials. You then set up some scans that will go and trawl a load of information, put it into your asset catalog. And then when you're here, you can either search for things or you can dig into browse assets and go and explore all the various things it's found. Okay, cool. Let's crack on. So asset tagging. So in that bit, when we had that schema and we had that column called classifications, and we had that scan, and it asked me, what are all the different things you want to scan for? There's two main different concepts that we need to understand. So in this case, I'm looking at this thing, I've got a name on there. There's someone's name on those credit cards. So if I'm getting some data through and I've scanned an invoice, I've got a picture of a credit card, I've got some actual just a receipt transaction coming through from my till system, what does that actually mean? Now, to a blunt classification, that's going to look at that and say that's a person. So that's PII data, and that's sensitive. I need to protect it. I need to make sure it doesn't actually get kind of misused. I need to wipe it after my business is done. I need to include it in PII. I need to have some right to be forgotten. And that's all what that actual thing, what type of object it is. On the other side, I've got the actual context, right? That's the customer billing name. That's the person who is a purchaser who is actually buying on behalf of someone else. Now that's business context to me. Now that name somewhere else, used in a different field, used in somewhere else, it's still a person's name, but it might be the shipping contact, it might be the salesperson. You know, you've got this whole difference of what kind of thing it is, it's a person's name, to what does that mean in the context of the business for this particular instance of that. And that's an important differentiation to make, because there's two different types of tagging that we do. So what it is, how we should use it, relates directly, wrong keyboard, into these two different terms. I've got classifications, and that's all the what. So when I scan, it's going to say, these are my classifications. That's an email address, that's a bank card, that is a social security number, that's whatever it happens to be. And they can be identified programmatically, but that doesn't give us context. That doesn't give us what it means inside the business. So your classification is really good for working out security, working out how many bits of PII data do I have, working out how many instances of an email address, what data should be obfuscated, who's allowed to access that data. That is very much on the classification side and is very much done automatically by a big bunch of rules. Glossary terms, very different. Glossary terms are manually curated. That's my giant list of my KPIs. When I talk about profit, these are the fields that are actually talking about profit. And that's not generated by rules. That's not generated by this massive automated scanner. I have to go in as a data steward and say, well, that's not just a person's name. That is my customer buyer name, my purchase name, my bill to person name. And it should be used by this, and it shouldn't be shared with these people. The business rules and the business context for it is very much on the glossary side. So be aware we've got these two very different concepts that are actually both tagged in a single asset. What is it? How should it be used? Kind of tie into each other. So when we've got a particular asset, we'll get both these things. We've got classifications based on a load of rules, based on a load of things, and we can add new automated classification rules. We can build those, and we'll quickly show those based on time. And then we've got glossary terms, and that's more of my documentation, more tying it into my particular me as a company. This is how I define that. This is how we work that out. This is the calculation used in related to that. So two very different kind of things, but both super, super useful. Okay, so let's switch back and have a little look at that. So I'm going to go into my assets. I'm going to go back into my customer one, digging down into InventureWorks, into sales, into customers. And I know in my schema inside customers, I've got little bits of information. So I can see it's tagged a lot of things automatically. I've got an email address, person's name, I've got a US phone number, but I've also got customer name as a glossary term. So classifications, really useful for doing that, my overall insights. Should people be able to access this table? No, it's got PII data in there. That's kind of a classifications thing. And we can dig into it when we go into the management side of stuff. So over in the management center, I've got loads and loads of settings I can use to augment this stuff and build out and do more and more stuff. So classifications, actually a big list of here's all the different classifications, here's the different types of data I can have. You know, Turkish nationality, UK driver's license, all these different things. But I can say, you know what, I want my own one. I want a new classification, which is a new type of ID. Maybe it's my personal ID. Maybe it's my loyalty card number inside my own store brand, and I can put in a pattern to recognize it. So if I do a brand, nope, no, I need to give it a special name. And then this is my store brand ID number. So we can go and build these things out and say, well, that's a unique thing I'm looking for. But then I need to say, well, actually how to do that. And that's a classification rule. Now there's a whole load of built-in ones. Now these are all the ones that are being sourced from all the work Microsoft have done elsewhere in terms of recognizing PII data. But I can say I want to have a classification rule of my own. You know, so my store brand ID, and then you can see here there's two different things I can do. I can set up a data pattern. So this is going to sample the data inside that column. It's going to do some profiling. It's going to read the actual data, apply it to a regex pattern. So I can put a regular expression pattern in here, say, again, distinct match threshold, minimum match threshold. So if 10% of the data matches this, it's probably going to be my store brand number, and this is the pattern to look for. Or on the flip side, I can actually just say, well, the column title, don't bother scanning all the data, because that takes time and effort. Just look at the column name. If the column name is like store brand, that's probably going to be my own loyalty ID. So you can go either way. You can do database sampling, or you can do column name sampling, or you can do a combination of the two to build up actually some pretty sophisticated rules. Now, anytime you onboard a new thing, you can add that to your scan. When it scans it, it'll tag anything it finds and classify it. So your ability to automatically do PII special data tagging inside data as you onboard it, it's great, super, super useful. On the other side of things, what this bucket here is for, this is my glossary. So whilst the classifications are very much like me as the admin, as the person behind the scenes setting up all my security rules for how my scans work, glossary is much more a kind of crowdsourced. This is coming from the business. So I can go in here and say, when I want a new glossary term, and I can set up defaults. I can say, well, actually, when I say glossary, I expect you to fill in these 4 fields. I build my own template. There's a system default. There's a whole little thing saying, what is this new term? So my new term is going to be it's my brand number, whatever it happens to be, description, an acronym. Actually, we call it that, my customer brand number. So my CBN, sure. I can add documentation. I can add a link, a URL to say, actually, when someone asks about that, there's a page on our wiki about that already. I can go and link it to it and get documentation linked in. I can actually say, well, synonyms. Well, they call it customer brand number. They also call it loyalty card number. They also call it store brand number. And you can tie together all these definitions and say, well, these mean the same thing. So again, that data deduplication, we've got ability to tie together all these different definitions. And we can say, these are the people to ask. If people are asking about the brand number, this is the AD person. You want to go and talk to Simon. There we go. People have to go and talk to me if they want to hear about the customer brand number, because that falls into my purview. I'm going to keep doing that. So all the way through, it's kind of all about that kind of linking together these different bits of documentation. And again, I've not filled that in, so it's going to tell me off. That is not an approved validation term, but it's fine. I don't care. Okay, so when we're actually in an asset, so I can go back to my customer asset, okay, drill down into it, sales, into my customer, and actually I can then modify this. I can actually say, oh, there's a glossary term that actually I need to edit. Go in here, and I can say, this one, my customer ID, that's part of my customer name. It's not, but still, so once you've built up your big list of glossary items, you can then manually go through your different data sets that actually are related to that and start hooking them up. And that's very much more manual than your classification scans. So be aware these two very different ideas of glossary, manually curated, very verbose, very wordy, business facing, good to give people context and richness and descriptions. Classifications, just a tiny little thing, rule based, automated for looking and managing at who's got access to my data, who's doing stuff with my data. Two very different concepts. Alrighty, I'm doing okay for time, keep pushing through. So lineage, that super important thing that was missing out of Azure Data Catalog. Talk about what's actually in there. So I've got this idea. I've got my SQL table sitting in the SQL database, and then I've got my sales LT customer CSV. So something has gone into my SQL database, it's pulled it out, and it's landed it in a lake as a CSV. Now me looking at that, I'm like, yeah, that's the same thing. But I don't know that. So lineage is something that they've actually implemented into Purview. So if it's going through one of several scannable processes, it'll automatically go, oh no, yeah, it was this process that ran that move there. And one of the big ones is Data Factory. So if I've got a copy activity in Data Factory saying, grab my data from there, put it over there, and I run it, it's going to actually add that into Purview saying, and this is the lineage. It was this process that picked data up and it ran at this time and it moved it across. And I was super skeptical when I first looked at that because I was like, yeah, but I never mapped that manually in the Data Factory object. It's all dynamic, right? You pass parameters in and you say, take these 100 tables and copy it into these 100 files, and it changes every time. And the good thing is, actually, rather than looking at the object definitions in Data Factory, it looks at the actual output. It says, no, there was 100 different things that ran, and here's the parameters, and this is what actually happened inside each of those copy activities. So if you're moving data around via a Data Factory copy activity, via a Data Factory mapping data flow actually works for it nicely. If you're doing it via lots of Power BI stuff, so Power BI data flows, lots of different kind of ways of moving data around, it can actually recognize and scan and build that lineage into your data catalog. So we should be able to see that in different ways. So this is a fancy one. I've not actually scanned my Power BI tenant, so I do apologize. I don't have a demo of the Power BI one, but I can show you Data Factory. And we've got this kind of thing. So I've got data coming from lots of different places. And then there was a process to land that into Synapse. And then they were used as part of a Power BI data set. And then we actually bring that into a report. So getting that lineage end to end. And so if someone came to us and said, we're going to change that retail locations data, like table, is anything going to be affected? And we go, yes, lots of things. We've now got that visibility end to end. Now, that's not perfect. It doesn't work for everything. Certainly my way of working of doing lots of Spark and lots of notebooks and plug it into a thing and then stuff happens and it spits out data, it can't just read everything. It's not magic in terms of how it understands stuff. But we can actually use the API, as I mentioned earlier, to augment what it can do. So let's have a quick look at lineage. Firstly, we need to plug it in to those things that are doing those operations. So back over in our management center, yes, go away. We've got the ability to plug in a data factory. So I can say, this is the data factory I want you to actually be pulling data from. So whenever I run something in that data factory, if I've registered it with Purview, it'll use that data when working out lineage. So just by hooking up, I didn't do anything else. I just said, here's the data factory. This is how you connect to it. Let's go use that one. That's it. That is all the setup that you do. So as long as it can access it, as long as the Purview MSI has access to go and talk to it, it'll then scrape all that data out, and then we can go and see it. So if I go and again grab, I've got my customer one that we used, so I can go grab my adventure work, drill down, find my customer, and then this lineage tab will be populated if we have some lineage. So you can actually see it's my scan has worked. So it said, well, that table, that's used in 2 different data factory jobs. So there's 2 different CSVs in my lake, which have actually come from this one table. And these middle bits, these assets that are specifically a data factory job, I didn't create in Purview. These have been sucked in just by the fact I've associated data factory. I didn't have to tell Purview that it was connected to that file and that file. I'd done a scan on my database, I'd done a scan on my lake, and it used the data factory logs to fill in the blanks and go, well, that came to that and that came to that, and I can stitch all those things together. Now, again, it's not magic, it doesn't do it for everything. Some of those intermediate processes you might have to manually create via the API. But it's actually, I'm just amazed that it can do it at all. The other thing that you can get, it's not just file lineage. So I've got this fact, this one table went into these two files, that's cool, but I can also open this and I've got my list of my structure. So when I'm on this asset, I can go, actually, where did my email, first name, last name, my PII info I had on this table? Okay, so it's grayed that out. So actually, it's not used in that file, but it is used in that file. So it's not just this file that went into this table, went into this table. It's this particular columns, these bits that I'm worried about, these bits of PII, where do they flow through my process? Again, right to be forgotten. Where are you using my email address? Go and delete it, please. If I've just got this map saying these are exactly all over my system where I'm using your data, I can go in there, I can manage that data, I can avoid a gigantic, hefty fine for misusing people's data. So lineage tracking, the basic stuff with Data Factory, great. The Power BI side, great. Some gaps in the middle where you're doing some transformation via things like Storeprocs or Spark jobs or Azure functions or anything weird and wonderful, but you have the ability to fill those gaps in, which is pretty cool. Okay, I guess you guys need to be wrapping up now. Wrapping up, 10 minutes, what are we thinking?
Yeah, we got enough time.
We have more time, someone, if you want.
We're scheduled to go to past, so don't worry.
Ah, great, I'll just crack on then. I don't have too much more. The only other thing I wanted to really cover is, I guess, where those classifications get used. So there's this whole thing called Asset Insights, and that's kind of like all the stats it goes through. So how many things it's tagged, how many things it had PII, how many things were sensitive, how many things were government sensitive versus financial sensitive. They'll go through and do all that tracking for you. So again, if you are an information steward, if you are tasked with managing the quality of that and how it all ties together and all that kind of stuff, then this is kind of where it pulls all of that information together for you. So there's a ton of stuff in there. Actually, basic, what kind of data sets am I getting? Where's the bulk of my data? Is it largely in SQL databases? Is it largely in a lake? Mine's largely a lake base. That's of no surprise to anyone. And then how that fits together. So let's just dig a little into what I've got in there. So we can go and have a look at my insights. And there's just a ton of these pre-built reports. So you can go and say, my different insights, how are they? What kind of things do they go into? Of my various scans, how many scans have I ran? What was found in each scan? So if you suddenly got a massive spike in terms of, oh, someone's created like 200 assets and they're all sensitive data, what's someone doing with my data? So you can do that kind of digging in and finding anomalies and finding what are people been doing, just to kind of dig in and understand that stuff. Glossary, are people using glossary data? Is your business actually going in and maintaining that and filling it in and updating glossaries? How many people are using your glossaries? Kind of, are they actually tagged? Or have you built this massive thing, but no one's actually using it? You can kind of start to dig into that kind of stuff to understand how the business understands your data. Again, I don't have much. Classification, one of the more useful ones, because that's the one that is fairly rich and automatically updated as a result of all those scans that you're writing. Just a wealth of info. It goes off and scrapes and pulls in. Again, was it personal? Was it government? Was it system? Was it one of your custom ones? Again, you can build those regex style classifications and have your entire own data profiler that's going off and looking at that kind of stuff. Again, because it's just regex, there's a ton of different things that you could do saying, how many things are missing this kind of data? You could actually just put in just some other patterns that aren't necessarily classifications and still use this as a way of scanning and categorizing and managing data, which is kind of useful. And then what kind of data am I having? And you can dig into it and we'll go, person's name, well, where was that? And then you can get this idea of like, actually, this is what's being done. World cities, I've got one thing that's got world cities in. Okay, it was coming from that source. So this kind of like, from that kind of very high level, this is what's going on. You can dig down and go, wait, well, what type or which source? And you can start to actually say, drill down and say, well, tell me exactly where that happened. I'm not expecting to have any bank cards. Why is there a bank card in my data? And you can go look and you might get, you know what? It's not a bank card. Unclassify that, remove that classification. You can go and tweak it and have a play with that stuff. Sensitivity, again, what's PII, what's not PII? Now, based on all my classifications, even though I've got bank cards and things, it's not classed anything as sensitive. So I don't know if that's how I've set up my scans. I don't know if that's, I've not marked it in my glossary terms as sensitive. And it's not doing too much of that. And again, extensions, what kind of data do I have? Now, I'm finding some of the bits and pieces in here a little slow to update. And digging through the documentation, there's some bits where they said this will update within 24 hours of doing a scan. So it's kind of like, it's very much not meant to be this lightning. Someone's just put a file in your database, go stop them. It's not that kind of prohibitive data governance. It's kind of like the next day you'll be looking at a report and going, okay, we should tidy that up. It's kind of like keeping an idea on the general ebb and flow of your data estate. It's not an immediate alert warning going off, go and handcuff that person. And it's kind of interesting in terms of how it categorizes some stuff. So the only other thing I wanted to have a quick look at is, for me, of absolute vital interest is, does it understand anything in a lake? Because in terms of how data catalog came along, it just didn't understand lakes. It was like, I don't know, it's just a lake, it's got some folders and files in there, that's not data. Whereas to me, that is like the vast majority of my data is living inside these things. So if I dive into my sample lake, I can see it's got a load of stuff in there. It's got my folder structure. I can dig in, I can go and we'll have a look in customers and sales. I can go and see that data. And yes, it understands that I have some data sets. Now, actually, what you start getting is a thing. Have I got it in my base layer? I think I've got it in my base. The problem with lakes is you end up with this idea of Spark partitions. So it doesn't know that it's just a Parquet file. I'm like, well, that's just Parquet. And it doesn't matter, it's a single file, it's just a collection of files. And I don't care how many files are in there. And the great thing is it's actually sort of started to recognize, well, that's Spark partition. I'd love it if it said that's Spark partitions and it's sitting in my customer folder, but it doesn't quite know. So if I wanted to start manually curating this, I need to go and edit it. I need to amend this object, say it's not called Spark partitions. This is, where does it even live? This was inside my sales LT customer. So for me, if I'm talking about Spark and a Hive and all that kind of stuff, this is my sales LT schema, my customer table. Just the fact that it's held as Spark partitions, it doesn't matter. So it's not very good at actually recognizing the contents of a folder just belongs to whatever that folder is called. But at least it recognizes this is one coherent data set. This is one collection of data. And even better, it has managed to go and look at the schema of that. Despite the fact that that's Parquet, it's read the Parquet, it's scanned the Parquet properly, it's done the same level of classification to understand how that data fits together. It just, the only thing it's got wrong, it just hasn't named it properly, which isn't too bad. I can forgive that, I can fix that. So it's getting better at understanding what we mean when we're talking about that. Now, what I need to find is if somewhere I've got a thing called a resource set, because a resource set is something when we've got things like partitioning. Let me see if I've got in my advancing lake, because you have this idea of folder structures being used to denote structure. Do I have it in there? I don't have it in there. Or I'm not actually sure I have a resource set. Let's see, do I have a resource set? Because what it can actually recognize is if I've got a folder structure which had year equals 2020, year equals 2021, year equals 2022, and that had data inside it, it can look and go, that's all the same thing. Actually, I don't need to think about that as entirely separate folders. I can think about that as one collection of folders. Unfortunately, I don't know. There we go. So I've got this customer CSV, and it's recognized this in terms of the structure. It said, well, actually, no, that's not great. We don't need to think about that as one customer addresses folder. Actually, we've got years, months, days, and we don't think of that as entirely separate resources. There's not a customers for 2020, customers for 2021, customers for 2022. There's just the idea of customers, and then I've got a variable, I've got a named set. So it can actually understand partitioning. It can understand the fact that I have some grouping of data, and it'll go through and group all those together, which is getting there. It's getting there. Unfortunately, it doesn't do it for Parquet yet, but it can do it for CSVs held across things. It can do it for named patterns. If you have just one folder and that's got a ton of different files in there and they've got the data in there, it'll recognize that pattern. So some of the pattern matching that it does when it looks at that is actually quite smart in terms of recognizing whether the same things with just different identifiers, different dates, different structures to denote it. Just a pity it's not very good at understanding Spark yet. The plus point being we've got APIs, so we can get in, we can modify that, we can intercept it on its journey. So just to kind of wrap things up largely, this is our original thing. We're saying, well, these are all the different people that were hammering on the door for Azure Data Catalog that are now looking at Purview going, does this do what I need it to do? And mostly, not everything. So we're talking about these groups. Information security is actually fairly well covered. So ability to work out what sensitive data do I have? What could be a data breach? What could actually leave us vulnerable to some kind of PII, GDPR, California rules, whatever they may be? That is actually quite good at us being tracked on that holistically across a whole range of different data sources. That works quite nicely. Our data owners, our ability to say, well, actually, these are the same thing. These have got the same data. My ability to have a data dictionary, which is the formal physical structure of my data. This table has these 20 columns. These are the data structures. These are the data types. This is how many rows it has. That kind of data dictionary, pretty good. And a business glossary. I've got loads of information I can tag on to my assets to say, this is who owns it. This is who you should go to for help. This is the documentation for it. That's all actually pretty good. We're talking data stewards, less good. So one of the things that Data Catalog Gen 1 did, if you pointed at a SQL DB, it would do some data profiling and say, like, this is how many unique records, this is how many unique values in this column. It would do like basic data profiling. We don't have that in Purview yet. I mean, this is a preview product, so who knows what we'll have by the time it goes GA. But currently, some of that quality metrics, some of the reporting on how complete is the data, we don't see that kind of thing. But then the data lineage, where did the data come from, who's using it, is actually there. So it's kind of it's not a no, but it doesn't do everything that a data quality steward might want it to. Data engineering, again, pretty good. The fact that we can build in dependency chains, that we can query something and say what's used downstream of this and trigger off those things all via the API. I guess the only reason I've marked that as an maybe is because so much of it is dependent on the API. That Atlas API, this kind of open source cataloging tool that's baked inside of Purview, is so extensible and so plumbable into Spark and functions and all that kind of stuff. It's just, you kind of have to do it yourself. So I'm not going to give it a full flying marks green tick, just because there's a lot of extensibility that you're going to have to bake yourself into your solutions. Now, I do say that, but when you're looking at the Purview documentation and they're talking about things like lineage tracking, they say currently it supports copy data factory activities and it supports, mapping data flows, and it supports Power BI. But it talks about using it for store procs and notebooks and this whole range of other stuff, which is actually much closer to how people actually work. And I'm kind of hopeful that because they're laying it out as this is how we expect it to work, we're going to see a few more features and stories to make it easier to plug in and go, I'm talking to that asset, I've just done that. I'm going to just make it a little bit more plug and play. Currently, you can do so much, but you just have to build around the API manually. And there's a ton of open source projects for working around with that. And then for data consumers, yes, you can get a ton of info. You can very easily go, where's it talking about profit? Where do I look at this term? Where is my percentage year-on-year metrics for my growth and my sales? And I can just find that glossary term and it'll tell me here are the assets that contain that. But that whole the nice, this glossy sales picture of I've got my homepage and I go in there and I'm like, where am I dealing with customer? And then I get this just massive list of some of it is lake folders, some of it is actual CSVs, some of it's actually something that just happened to mention customer in there. It's the search activity is possibly a little bit too detailed for a lot of business users. So I want to go, no, I'm looking for it in a data lake storage Gen 2. Would they look for that? I'm looking for it in SQL DB. I'm looking for my Power BI data set. It's kind of like trying to throw too much information at you than I would expect for a lot of business users to be looking for off the straight one. It's kind of like I should be able to set preferences and say, for this kind of person, here's the kind of thing. I want to make this discoverable. I want to make this part of what I can see, but I want to show this to the business or this to these roles in the business. And I know there's a lot of stuff kind of that is kind of in the pipeline that they're thinking about in terms of how do we have this managing for different roles? How do we actually sort of communicate to these different personas? So all in all, it's ticking a lot more boxes than it used to. Like certainly Data Catalog Gen 1 did not do so much out of the box. And the fact that it's all Apache Atlas based is a huge, huge thing in driving adoption, in terms of driving compatibility, and in terms of getting so many of these people on board. There's just a little bit more to go because it is still in preview. And again, it's only been in preview for about a month or so. So I'm expecting that we'll see quite a lot of additional features, a bit of change, some more things getting smoothed out. Some of these bits that are like, oh, it doesn't quite do what I'd like it to do, should actually be smoothed out the way as we see it move towards GA. Now that is a lightning tour of what's in Purview currently, what it can do, some of my thoughts about how it works. And yeah, hopefully that helps people put it in context, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions. But again, it's very preview, so I might not know the answer. Apologies in advance.
Thank you, Simon. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It was my first look at it, so really interesting. Do you want me to read the questions out to you, or do you want to open the Q&A panel yourself and take a look?
Yeah, I have the panel open during the talk until obviously everything failed and I had to join last minute.
It's fine. It's fine. Underneath the new, that's where your questions are. We have published those who were more, where's the YouTube channel and stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's the YouTube channel, and I'm talking about Purview and Spark and Synapse and all things that interest me. Okay, published questions. What do we have?
Go to new.
New. Okay, fine. Okay, so when I see the video available for Purview, I see the ability to scan the entire subscription. Our version does not seem to have that option. We are missing other sources that appear in the videos. Can you explain why we're missing some of those? Yes, absolutely. So one, all the videos that you tend to see coming from Microsoft Mechanics and coming from Microsoft, they're using far fancier versions than is available on the public preview currently. So as you saw with me going through mine, I've got a limited set of options available. And when you see them doing like the proper Microsoft videos, you see things like the ability to do Hive tables, the ability to do wider scans, the ability to do lots of different bits and pieces. A lot of that is just because it's not ready for the public preview yet. So when I'm talking about things moving to GA, we're kind of going to go and see loads more of those ability to scans, ability to hook in extra data sources, ability to automatically register lineage from things. And I'm hoping that that list of stuff is going to grow and grow and grow. No idea any timescales and roadmaps. And if I did know any, I probably wouldn't be allowed to share them, but I don't know them. So I can't even mistakenly share any roadmap bits and pieces for it. But I'm assuming most of the stuff that they are showing in those demonstration videos in the early site, Inspire, Build, etc. videos, you'll see those come in as we move to GA and past GA. Okay, other bits. Will announce the service to be available as an Xbox at some point in the future? I have no idea. I would hope so. You'd expect so. It's one of those ones that because they've built something that can actually parse and understand the Power BI data sets, it's probably quite a quick thing for them to actually enable in the future. So I would absolutely assume that the Azure Analysis Service is going to be on the roadmap. Again, that's an assumption. That's my gut feel, but I don't actually know. What about SQL Server iteration services? Actually already on the roadmap. So if you're using SSIS inside Data Factory, that is one of the things that currently supports Lineage. And again, I've not tried it because I'm not going to touch SSIS, but currently it is listed on the documentation as it's one of the supported things of Lineage. So if you're using an SSIS data flow and you're using that inside an SSIS integrated runtime inside Data Factory, then it will be able to say, hey, I had that table, it was SSIS that plumbed the two, and that will appear in your Lineage. So that's listed as currently supported. So I'm assuming various other things as part of SSIS are currently supported, but I've not looked at it myself. It is just in the docs. I can ping a link to the docs in the chat, but I don't know how far that support is actually going. Okay. Can you start use permissions based on a collection instead of an entire catalog? I don't know, really. But a lot of what I heard when they were first announcing it and they're first talking about how this is going to plumb into stuff, a lot of it is about working with roles and discoverability in different user sets who can see different things. So I'm absolutely 100% assuming that that lower grain ability to control visibility of different data assets is something that's going to be plumbed in. I've not seen anything in here currently about how you do that. So I'm assuming that's a feature that's coming. That is something that we'll see. If it's a data catalog where you can't restrict what users can see things, it's just not going to be fit for purpose. So I absolutely 100% hope they're going to bake that in. I've not seen it in the preview yet. Could be a missing part of it, but certainly in anything where we're dealing with sources and collections, there isn't that there's not a lot of detail there currently. You just create a collection and add sources to it. There isn't really a create a collection and then map roles in on top of it. But maybe that's something that kind of they're just getting the scanning and the basic asset collection working, then we'll see more stuff come in. So again, don't know. I told you I'm not going to know the answer to most of the questions. Okay, is it possible to add more than one glossary item per column? Not currently, not that I've seen. So we can go and try it. I can actually just have a bit of a dig. Currently, I think it's quite blank. It's one categorization and one glossary thing per item, which again isn't necessarily true to life. Doesn't really explain how we think about things. Something might be a credit card number and a PII bit of data if you want to categorize it those ways. So we try on here, try and edit it. I'm pretty sure, yeah, we just get oh no, okay, I tell you what, we can actually start to categorize things. So it is a multi-selection drop-down. So if it does match a couple, we can actually do that. So let's just do that, save it. One of the things to note there actually is when you are manually updating an asset, that breaks future scans. It doesn't break, it says, we'll prevent future scans on this asset from updating it. And for me, that seems a bit of a hole, right? So if I go and add something to my glossary terms and say, this is my customer name, and then later I add something else to recognize customer names automatically, that's not going to run, it's not going to update this asset. So I don't know if that's just a preview thing or not, but we'll see how that works. But certainly, yes, by the looks of it, you can update a single object and map it to more than one glossary term and more than one classification, which, you know, in terms of, yeah, there we go. So absolutely fine to map multiple things together. That seems okay. And it kind of makes sense because Apache Atlas under the hood is just a graph. It's, you know, it is a graph database. You've got nodes and edges. They're saying this one node of my first name is mapped to several different edges. So it kind of makes sense that you can do multi-selection. And it's true to life, you know, things will match several different glossary terms. So I'm kind of glad that we can do that. Okay, will Data Factory Scan handle when objects are created with parameterized metadata-driven factories? It sounds like it should do if it's using the logs. Yes, it does, and I am shocked and amazed. So that bit of lineage that actually showed, when I'm looking at this, the lineage it has, that copy table to lake, if we go and look at that in Data Factory, it's nice that we've got a link to go straight to Data Factory to see it, you know, and it blocks it because of connectivity. We can't do, oh, for God's sake. Okay, I can't show you what that Data Factory actually looks like, annoyingly, but that is a generic Data Factory that says, tell me the schema and the table name, tell me the location in the lake, and that's parameters in, parameters out, that's fully parameterized. I ran it in a for each loop with like that list of tables. And it pushed all that out. So in terms of that schema, that is all created by the same Data Factory single pipeline with parameters ran each time. So none of that is hard coded. I've not used the dataset mappings. I've not specified schemas. That is all just here's some data, off you go, run, and it goes through. So I was very surprised. It's all pretty good. Okay, how does Purview stand up against Century 1 documents? I have no idea, honestly. So for a lot of the work that I do, we don't use anything that isn't platform as a service Azure native. So if it's a separate tool that needs a separate license and has to be installed on a VM and kind of clustered up separately, we don't use it. And because of that, back in the day, we didn't use any of the Century 1 stuff for that particular thing, especially when we're talking about lakes. Honestly, I've not gone anywhere near it for quite some time, so I can't say. I am not experienced enough in the Century 1 tools to actually sort of say how it stacks up. It's a good question, and if anyone is currently digging into it, I would say stack it up against Apache Atlas. It's probably quite a good way to balance it out. Okay, does it do historical compares of snapshots and scans against each other and tells you what changes? Can you compare the scan of a database on production and compare to the scan of the same database on dev, QA, etc.? Tell you to apply or promote changes from tests and that kind of stuff. Okay, loads of questions baked into there. So for things like dev, test, prod, they will be categorized as different things. It is intrinsically links the definition of an asset to the physical place where it lives. So no, we'll see the production version of that table different to the QA version of the table, different to the dev version of that table. In terms of when you update things via a scan, we dig into what actually a scan looks like. So now we've already scanned. Can I actually show this? I think that's not doing that. Let's view details. Okay, I can do a new scan. So actually, when we dig into stuff, we should actually, there's a little button. There's none of those. Let's go. Okay, so you had scan scope full. So essentially, you've got this idea of saying, are you doing an incremental scan? So it's only going to work out any objects it didn't see before, going to find change detection, and going to update it. Or you're doing a full scan and blasting all your existing definitions and overwriting it. So it's got that idea of essentially what kind of scan, but that seems to be more efficiency, seems to be more about making the scan faster and kind of changing the way that you work with it. I've not found a way yet to say what changed. So from that scan last week to this scan this week, that asset used to be this, it's now this, that kind of slowly changing history kind of things of assets as you go. All I've managed to find is this is what the asset currently is. So you can, if you're using the API and you're bringing out your bulk entity export list, that has an updated thing on there. So you can definitely do run a scan, get a list, get a list, run a scan, get another list, and compare updated dates. It's not fantastic, it's not great, but you certainly have the ability to then manage it that way. I would love to be able to say the results of this scan, this is what changed, but literally you get I classify this as many assets, I discovered this many assets. There's no further digging in to understand what actually happened inside that scan. So scans are a little bit rudimentary, they're a little bit just hit go, and don't worry, we'll manage things for you. You don't need to see the details, we'll just sort this out for you. I'd love to see that kind of lower grain detail of this is exactly what happened, we changed this, we made it there, and actually have an audit trail in my governance tool. That would make sense, wouldn't it? But yeah, currently you'd have to do something like that manually by pulling out the API. And so many answers are going to be there. You can do it by the API. There's so many things you can do by the API. Okay. And document tables and fields in standalone access databases or Excel files on your shares that aren't in SQL Server and are extracted into SQL Server with SSIS. So I think it's more a case of will it be able to. So I think currently these are all the things that we have. So we have blob storage. So it depends on what's going to be in blob storage. Data store Gen 1. We don't have on-premises files. I'm pretty sure, I think from when they were doing the YouTube videos from the likes of Microsoft Mechanics, you know, certainly that list of stuff you get is huge. There's a vast array of different things they can pull from. So I'm assuming you're going to be able to do a plethora of the Power Platform or SharePoint lists or on-premise things via a gateway. You can set up an integration runtime in here. So we're down in our config. Got an integration runtime, so I can say, this is my self-hosted integration runtime. This is my gateway down into my on-prem server to go and talk to my on-premise SQL servers, my on-premise file shares, all that kind of stuff. So I'm expecting to see the ability to do all that. I don't think you can in the preview. And again, how much you'll be able to do when it comes to CGA, I have no idea. Okay, don't know, too early. Do you know what the search engine is? And it's possible to optimize other than using tagging in my catalog. I have no idea. Honestly, I'm assuming it's something Bing based, but no, I don't know what they've actually sort of used to actually do that and how we can tweak and tailor that search experience. I would love to kind of get a little bit more into there and say this kind of role, they're going to prefer this kind of assets for this kind of people, put them in that persona bucket. They don't need to see that. They don't want to see lineage. They don't want to see folder objects and the like. They just want to see the actual things that I want to expose to them. Don't know how much of that we can do in here yet. I've not seen a lot of that ability exposed. Again, I'm hoping that enriching that is something that we see growing, something we see kind of building over time. Oh, so many questions. Okay, can you touch on needed licensing or pricing to run Purview on all clients, use machines, servers, and shares? So you need 365 license to automatic classification, labeling across devices at least. Yeah, honestly, again, don't know. So there was communication that came out last week saying that the pricing will be effective from the middle of February. It currently doesn't require a lot of licensing. It's fairly cheap because it's a preview. You can go and have a play, have a dig, see what it's like. So if you just want to kind of open it up and see how it works, I think you can kind of do that fairly cheaply, if not for free currently. From mid-Feb, certainly, there will be a cost associated. And in terms of the cost that's per scan, per entity actually sort of stored, per the amount of data storage inside Purview, per user who's going and collecting it, I don't know much about the pricing model, and certainly I don't know much about the wider 365 implications of that. Everything I've seen so far is in purely Azure subscription licensing. So it is a pay-per-use inside Azure, not part of your wider subscriptions. But I don't know the depth of the detail on that, I'm afraid. Something I do need to dig into so I can have a look and see what the wider implications of that are. What levels do they need to go down to? Source field, destination field, column level, who does not do views, which is a major issue, and most reporting goes against views, and lineage from SQL Server on-prem database tables to Power BI, SSRS reports detail will not be captured. Is this the case? Does it capture view column detail and show lineage from table to views? Honestly, not tried it at the view level. Certainly, kind of views are amongst the objects that are listed as supported catalog elements. So it should be able to understand views and should be able to understand what's in there. Again, I've not tried explicitly going from a view into a table. It does go down to that column level. So you saw kind of in that quick example that we did when it's going from a SQL table down to a CSV using a dynamic thing, we can say which of these columns went to which of these columns. That column level lineage mapping is part of the profiling tool. Now, if there's anything that is missing, again, that's the thing I mentioned, that you can plug that gap. So you can ping a call into the API and say, this asset number to this asset number was linked via this process. Here are the columns that were linked. You can actually just fill those blanks in yourself. So if there are any gaps, if, for example, it doesn't actually support views, which again, I'd be surprised, but I've not tried 100% to say, you can actually fill those gaps in. We can call the API and say, I've just done that to there, fill those gaps in. So if you're doing my SSIS, or you had another process that's doing that, select stuff from a view, put it over there, you can tell it that that's what you've done. Not ideal, but you've got the ability to. All right, more. When's it expected to be GA? No idea. No clue, and if I knew, I wouldn't be allowed to say, but I still don't know. I literally have no idea where it is on the roadmap. Plans to add additional services like SSAS reporting services. Again, I don't know. When they're doing those reviews, you see a lot of those data sources on there. As to what order they're going to do them in, what the priority is, I'm not sure. Certainly, I would assume that the priority, they tend to be focusing on the native Azure stack first. So firstly, make sure we can do things like Cosmos, make sure we can do all of Synapse. Currently, when you go into your adding a Synapse thing, it says formerly SQL Data Warehouse. I've not actually tested if this can look at Spark objects that are registered in terms of Synapse, or even views that you've got in a serverless SQL pool. So it's kind of like filling out the rest of the Azure platform, I would assume, is going to be the first step before looking at things like expanding out into the on-prem estate. But as I alluded to earlier, that getting everything in that estate, if it can't do everything that is in your data estate, then it's not really a fully functioning governance tool. So fleshing out that list of data sources, I'm pretty sure is one of their highest priorities. As to when they get to it, I have no idea. I cannot speak to their roadmap. Can the data in the glossary be queried? Yes. So you can either query for a glossary term, so that will just allow you to query anything. You can go the other direction, so we can say from my glossary things, I can filter a certain keyword, so when they mention profits, dig into that. I can then say, well, what assets are tagged with that? So I've got one asset tagged with profit, go view that asset, I get a list of all things queried with that glossary term. So you can go both directions, either from an open query and then tag those terms into it, or you can go from your glossary to find those things and then narrow down that search. Yes, you can absolutely query and search within your glossary. What more? Is it possible to add more than one glossary per column? Yes. Yes, we've seen that. That works. Whew. Okay, that is our gigantic list of columns. Apologies for the speed of running through that. And honestly, apologies, I don't know that much about some of the additional features, what's coming, what's not coming, where the gaps are. Again, it's very new. And I've not used this in super anger. I've not tried to get this fully working in production. It's kind of something that a lot of people are looking at. There's a lot of excitement about it. People are certainly pinning a lot of hopes on it and trying to plug that big missing gap. But I've not actually seen that kind of, we've been using it in anger for 6 months. Here's all the problems with it. It's still very early side, and there's still probably a lot going to change over the next few months, 6 months, a year. I've no idea what kind of timescales they're talking about for QA, GA. Oh.
Well, I thought you did fantastic, Simon. It was great. You know, you knew much more than most of us did, I think. So that was fantastic. And I think people have gotten all their questions answered, and at least the ones we could answer for you. And so thank you very, very much. It was again great presentation. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. We will be better prepared next time. We will learn from our experience.
Yeah, apologies for having so many different teams, organizations that I cannot sign into one reliably.
Yeah, it was, you know, we learned from this. We know we need to have our preferred account. We need to know that, you know, that should be the one that get invited. But again, thank you, and thank you everyone who attended. It's, you know, it's been a great having Simon here telling us about Purview, and I just want to remind you that on February 16th we will have Alberto Ferrari talking about some Power BI composite models. But until then, thank you very much, and, you know, goodbye.